House of Commons, there'd be 5 to the left of me that are younger and 645 that are older. I've only just started shaving myself, so unfortunately I don't remember 1945. But I am a student of history, certainly an amateur one. And if you remember where we were economically, socially, we were in a pretty bad state. We come out of 6 years of the Second World War. You know, we ended up nationalising the railways. I actually think that's probably more about the practicalities of a railway system that had been completely clapped out without any maintenance over the previous 6 or 7 years. We had to do something about that. We'd lost swathes of housing because of bombing, but also we hadn't been building. We'd lost manpower. We'd lost men overseas in significant numbers, and the economy, of course, was completely shaped around a war economy. Our debts, you know, we've blanched today about the level of the debt and the deficit, particularly under this government. Actually, in historical terms, you know, go back to 45, and you'll see how bad a situation things were. And in the midst of that, you had something that was quite remarkable that a lot of people didn't see coming at the time. You had a big change election. And of course, for those of us that are on the left, we love this story, we rejoice in it, because you had Clement Attlee coming into power, a man, by the way, which many people consider not to be prime ministerial. Churchill's favourite joke, apparently, was an empty taxi pulled up outside of Downing Street, and Clement Attlee got out. You know, there was a sense in which he was a quiet, unassuming man. One of my favourite stories about Clement Attlee is he got a request from a school child who said, when he was Prime Minister, is there any chance you can get me Churchill's signature? So he goes and gets Churchill's signature, sends it back, and says, all the best, you know, Clement Attlee, done well. You know, he was a quiet, unassuming man, but released an incredibly radical government that I know didn't just win the election, but won the argument. Because what you had for the next 30 years, 1945 through to the mid-70s, whether it was red in power or blue in power, the fundamentals didn't really shift too much. You had the role of the state being expanded, you know, the amazing achievements in the face actually of Tory opposition, the NHS, you know, tackling the most pernicious of inequalities, health inequality, which when we talk about dignity in work, there can be no dignity if you are held back in a position where we actually have the ability to intervene and help you back in terms of health. The welfare state coming in and putting in place that safety net and providing that kind of dignity. The raft of social reforms, the house building, the economic incentives there, and just thinking about it as well, economically, we got growth. We got significant growth. And actually we got growth that reduced inequality, that didn't increase inequality. A really exciting story. But this morning I'm not just going to come here and say, here's my first story and sit down. Because my thesis this morning, which goes to the third story I'm going to talk about in a minute, is that very often you find these things to be cyclical. That the thing that works in the first place, that actually gives you the success, also there are the seeds of its downfall in the end. And being a student of history, I can see that very strongly actually in that model. So you had the state getting involved in setting prices, in setting wages, in being involved in owning most of the productive assets in the country. And it led to incredible growth, reduction of inequality, and social mobility as well. But by the time we fast forward into a period of major upheaval and confusion in the 70s, where actually, interestingly, people had lack of faith and trust in institutions. They questioned the fundamentals of politics. They asked whether things were going to change massively in terms of the state of nationalism. So you see the independence debate up in Scotland at that period of time. You effectively have coalition and minority government over that period as well. And there's a sense in which Britain is ungovernable against a backdrop of rising inflation, rising prices, rising wages, and a broader question about the institutions and our sense of trust and faith in them. Well, isn't it interesting actually that the thing that made that thing successful in the first place kind of stops working in the same way that it did about 30 years in. So that's my first story. Incredibly inspiring story, really positive for those of us they're on the left. But the second story is a more uncomfortable one for us to engage with, because it covers the period basically between about 1979 and I would say 2008. So the first story is about the state, the second story is about the market. We all remember those iconic images of Margaret Thatcher entering Downing Street, coming in on actually not a massively radical manifesto. It's quite interesting, and quoting St. Francis of Assisi and talking about how she's going to bring harmony and where there's discord. The alternative was actually what happened. She was not spoken of as being particularly prime ministerial before she was prime minister, actually, as well, quite interestingly. And there were major questions around whether or not we could even have single party strong government again. But again, 1979 was a big change election. So Thatcher comes in, she says, do you know what, we're going to get the state out of the way and we're going to increase power to the market. So you have the big bang in the city. You have, I'm speaking here, you can't ignore it. You have the complete decimation of northern industry as funding and money went further and further down to the city of London and the South East grew. And actually early on her plans didn't seem like, in the pure numerical sense they were working at all. You had the letters from the economists, 300-400 economists writing in saying, monetarism, this desire to keep inflation down, big change in the way that we do our economy, just isn't working. The Falklands War and etc. But actually, if you look at the raw numbers, we came out of the 80s a richer country, a far richer country than when we went into the start of them. Inequality, by the way, went up 3 times in that period of time, which we shouldn't lose sight of. But the thing that made it successful in the first place actually worked relatively well in terms of the raw numbers we paid for it, in terms of a massive social cost, loss of council housing, and so on. We fast forward through the end of those years into the new Labour period. And why do I say that it was a big change election? Because it changed the terms of debate, not just who was in power. In the same way that Clem Attlee comes in, introduces a massively expanded role for the state, Margaret Thatcher comes in, brings in a massively expanded role for the market. Actually, at that point, even when we came into power in 1997, the incredible achievements that we pulled off, rescuing the NHS, investing in public services, making sure that our schools, education, and others systems were actually working, providing dignity for people in them. Major strides, minimum wage, and so on. What we didn't do actually was change the fundamentals of that economic model. So where Thatcher would have said, let the market do what it wants, I suppose our ethos was a bit more that the market do what it wants, but we recognise inequality is a major issue and we're going to find ways to do that. So tax credits, for example. Take from the top, from the middle, stick it on the bottom and try and shore up the system. Major efforts on child poverty, major social changes such as Sure Style and whatever, incredible achievements. And actually, if I'm really honest, I don't think it's possible really to break out of these big periods of time until you get to a period of disruption. So I don't think Blair and Brown were wrong to do that. But the seeds of what makes it successful are also the seeds of the thing that crashed onto the rocks. And we saw that, didn't we, in 2008. So throughout the 2000s, we had these series of scandals around banking, around accountancy, little warning signs on the dashboard that suggested things weren't quite right there. And then we hit 2007, subprime mortgage market problems in the States linked to 2008. Gordon Brown really did save the world economy in that moment, and thank goodness we had him at the helm. But you couldn't have had a bigger, more disruptive moment. 30 years of the state, 45 through 79. 30 years of the market, 79 through 2008. And so we're on to the third story. And the third story is the story that we have to choose to write together. Because we're living through a period of time right now which is pretty exceptional in politics. We're going through a period of time where there's a lack of faith and trust in institutions. We've seen a series of scandals around banking, around the media, business, the church. Politics is an obvious one, and one that's not too far away from us. We're going through a period of time where people, if we're honest, don't have a lot of faith in any of the major parties to deliver the kind of changes that would allow people to have good and dignified lives in and of themselves. We're going through a period of time where the two-party duopoly that we thought was kind of pretty much constant, you can make a case that we're a six-party system all of a sudden. The rise of nationalism in Scotland, the rise of nationalism in England, actually, as well. You've got people coming along trying to sell easy answers and blaming all sorts of marginalised groups for the problems that people face, not least of all Nigel Farage. But I don't think this is exceptional in the sense that we haven't been here before. I think that if you lived through the 70s, you would say that you see many of the same factors and things going on that we live through right now. You're living through a period of time before a big change election, I think. And so the challenge for us, and this is where I think Christians on the left can be incredibly helpful, and where the church has something very powerful to say, is that if we view this as an opportunity, the moment where we can start to answer some of the big, difficult questions without falling into the traps that others have fallen into in the past, we can actually shape the world around us, not just by winning the election, but by winning the argument. In 2010, when I came to Parliament, I've sat in for every budget statement, I've sat in for every autumn statement, Chancellor of the Exchequer at the dispatch box. Bear in mind, we left a growing economy, and then for 3 years, everything went into neutral. And I watched George Osborne's face every single time, and it just left in me a kind of sense of something's not quite right there. And I tried to figure out what the expression on his face every time he stood up and explained why his plan wasn't working in the way that he expected it to do. Bear in mind, you know, the plan is basically you do what Thatcher did in '79. You slash back at the size of the state, you expect the market to come up, and you expect that rising tide to lift all ships. Conversation for another day. And I thought at first it was fear, but I don't think it was. I think it was confusion. Because they were doing all the things that used to work, but they're not working anymore. That's the confusion that they're living through. If you ask Clegg or Cameron, you know, was 2008 an anomaly? Was it like a little blip along the way to, you know, this kind of constant story that we're living through? Or was it a big epoch-making change? I think they would choose the former. And actually, when the question has been put to Cameron, he's said it's the former. So I think the risk for them, and what they're going through right now, is that they don't understand what a big change it was, and that there are certain cycles that are there. But let's be honest, because we're in a room by and large of Labour members and supporters, there's another risk. It's that we do the same, actually. That we pick up another story that other people have lived through, trying to put in place those values, you know, and try and apply those lessons now when they won't work. So it's a scary place to be, because there isn't a model on the shelf that we can just go and pick up. There isn't a nice triangulation point whereby we can say, well, it's a bit of this and a bit of that, and you know, a bit of spit and sawdust, and we'll hold it together. Why does politics feel so disruptive at the moment? They're so disrupted because we're on the verge of something big. I think I really do believe that. I had this picture of the shop window, the shutters coming up, and us being able to see into the institutions, these, the places where power kind of flows like a river and it leaves its indelible mark, these institutions. And you could see the stuff that was going on, the good stuff there, the bad stuff there, the stuff that's being redeemed and changed. And I think there's a real opportunity because the shop windows are up, but let's be honest, they're going to come down again as well. So the opportunity for us as Christians there to start helping to write that story of what the future looks like in the next 30 years in particular, I think is the challenge that we've got to put out there. To get involved in those institutions, to engage from a position of knowledge, not just of reading the signs of the times, but also the knowledge of people that have gone before us, great reformers in that Christian tradition. A gospel of engagement, a theology of power, an understanding of institutions, all these things that the church should be providing right now, and that areas where I think we need to be. Just going to finish up on what would be my version of the story. 30 is the state, 30 is the market. I think the risk here, of course, is that David Cameron's tried to give us an answer with society and before, and so it's quite easy to discount it, but I do think it is that. I think it's society. I don't think it's the big society, so term was completely derided and I don't think they believe in it. But I think it's a structuring of relationships in society in a way in which we respect the institutions that are there. So institutions such as family, things that we really care about, that we understand, that we want to protect and preserve. We were in the Commons about a year ago, and there were moves to try and change Sunday trading legislation, for example. When I worked at Woolies Member of Usdaw, actually worked my way up to be in charge of the pick and mix after 6 years there, so it was one of my first leadership role. Funny if I was on a 0 hours contract, but for me it was about the flexibility of being a student, being away. 0 hours contracts today are not about that thing. They're a direct assault on the ability for people to have dignity in work, to be able to provide for their families, to be able to spend time with their kids when they're trading exactly the same way. We need to be in that position of protecting and preserving the relationships that make our society good and provide dignity to people. But all too often, if we're really honest, as a party, we've been perceived as a party that doesn't respect those in the same way. On issues such as immigration, we've got to respond to those challenges, but we've got to respond with a strong voice that says we are pro all people, regardless of where they come from, and fighting for the dignity of those people that choose to come here and work, for example. I think we've got to look at the economy and ask deep questions about why it is that prosperity may rise overall, and yet for most people their experiences are much less secure, they're doing it on a much lower wage than they would have done before, and with fewer rights as well. We've got to respond to that. And beyond that, power that centralises and comes to Westminster needs to be pushed out and pushed further away, down to the local authority level and sub-regional, that kind of stuff. But actually we need to change the culture of our local politics as well, so that we're going with the grain of communities and not just doing things to them. We could go through 50 different areas where that picture could continue to be. But for me, I think, when I go and watch Luton Town on a Saturday afternoon, and I see the passion and pride that people have got in their football club, if I went and spoke to any of those people and said, would you like the state to come in and nationalise your football club? And say, hell no. Do you want big business and big money to dominate the sport, as it does at that slightly higher levels? And we're working there, don't we? No, not at all. There is such a thing as society, right? There are institutions that we care about. And all too often our politics tries to kind of own and subjugate them and try and make the world as we think it should be, when actually we need to go with the grain of what people are about. For me, I'll be honest, I think we've got a party leader that gets it. I think Ed has been really strong actually in understanding that this isn't a blip, but this is a major shift and there's a major opportunity. But the challenge for us is whether or not we're going to go out and fight for it. 2015 has the capacity to be this big change election. Think about Attlee, think about Thatcher, big figures who are more radical actually in government than they are even in opposition. And that's the challenge, I think, for us today. What are we going to do to make sure that we are the ones writing that story and not other people? Because we have a sense, the rich tradition of Christians on the left, the Christian socialist movement before it, a theology and an understanding of people which is based on the fact that they're fundamentally good, corrupted by all sorts of things in the world, but God's in the business of restoring people back and actually providing dignity, and that the right ordering of relationships in society is where we need that attention. I think that's the challenge that we've got this morning. It's why I wanted to come up this morning and talk about some of those ideas, and hopefully that in the provocation of those three stories we can find a space where we can offer answers to people, not just the cheap snake oil that others are selling. Thanks very much.